December 10th, 2004. Gary Webb left a letter for his family, loaded a .38 caliber pistol, and shot himself twice in the head. The coroner concluded his death was a suicide, but Webb's friends did not believe it. This was, after all, the reporter who had proven the CIA contributed to flooding the United States with crack cocaine. 8 years earlier, Webb published a series of articles showing the CIA protected drug traffickers who taught Los Angeles how to cook crack, creating thousands of new addicts every week. His sources included federal court transcripts, DEA reports, and confessions from the kingpins themselves. Just days after the articles were published, a strange click sound, like a wiretap, appeared on Webb's phone. Strange cars followed him home. The Washington Post, New York Times, and LA Times sent a total of 17 reporters, not to investigate the CIA, but to destroy Gary Webb. While Nancy Reagan traveled the country telling children, "Just say no," the CIA was protecting those who were shipping thousands of kilograms of cocaine into residential neighborhoods every year. The war on drugs turned out to be a gigantic lie, and Webb had touched the heart of that lie. July 18, 1995. Gary Webb stared at the half-eaten sandwich on his desk at the San Jose Mercury newsroom. The phone rang 6 times before he reluctantly picked it up. On the other end was Coral Baca, her voice trembling. She said the government was protecting the man who taught Los Angeles how to make crack. Webb put the sandwich down. Baca was not a conspiracy theorist. She was trying to save her boyfriend, Rafael Cornejo, from a life sentence for cocaine trafficking. According to her, Cornejo's supplier, Danilo Blandon, was still free and easy despite having brought about 3,000 kilograms of cocaine into the U.S. because he was working for the DEA. And before serving the DEA, Blandon had served another power. The Contras, Baca whispered, the Nicaraguan rebel force backed by the CIA. He sold drugs to raise funds for the CIA's army. In that moment, the pen in Webb's hand stopped moving. In 1995, the Contras' involvement in cocaine trafficking was not entirely new. Senator John Kerry had published a 1,166-page report on the matter back in 1989. But it was buried in the news, no one pursued it, no one was outraged, and no one was held accountable. But Baca said she had something few others had. Evidence contained in federal grand jury transcripts, where Blandon confessed everything under oath. 7 days later, Webb met Baca at the federal courthouse in San Francisco. She handed him a manila folder containing 98 pages of testimony, most of it heavily redacted. Amidst the blacked-out sections, names still emerged: Danilo Blandon, Norrin Meneses, Freeway Ricky Ross. On page 73, the words were clearly visible. Blandon testified that he sold cocaine to help the Contras, and that the FBI and CIA both knew about it. Webb's heart pounded. He could feel it in his throat. This wasn't just a rumor, but sworn testimony in a federal court. Blandon confessed to selling cocaine by the ton. His biggest customer, Ricky Ross, turned the powder into crack, igniting South Central LA. And according to the testimony, Blandon did all of this with the full knowledge and protection of U.S. intelligence agencies. Webb drove back to San Jose, the folder resting on the passenger seat. Every time he stopped at a red light, he glanced at the stack of papers. The name Ricky Ross kept repeating itself. Webb didn't know the full extent yet, but Ross was no ordinary trafficker. By 1995, the DEA noted that Ross had contributed to the spread of crack to nearly every major city in the U.S. His network moved an estimated $600 million worth of cocaine. He created a business model that other dealers across America copied. And according to the documents, his main supplier, Danilo Blandon, was protected by the very federal government. The next morning, Webb walked into the office of Editor-in-Chief Dawn Garcia. He said he needed 6 months and a travel budget. Garcia read the first few pages of the transcript, then the next, and by the 10th page, she looked up. She told him, "Take 8 months, take everything you need." They both understood. If even half of this was true, it would be the biggest scandal since Watergate. Webb began with a simple question: who is Danilo Blandon? The answer led him from the deadly fields of Nicaragua to the crack-addicted slums of Watts, from the drug trafficking routes in Miami to the committee rooms in Washington, where the truth often went to be buried. At every stop, he found the same pattern. Each time local police got close to Blandon or his bosses, federal agents would appear, and the case would abruptly stop. Each time prosecutors built a solid file, it would mysteriously collapse. Someone very powerful clearly wanted these men to remain free. In August 1995, Webb flew to Miami. His goal was to track down Oscar Danilo Blandon Reyes, the Nicaraguan cocaine trafficker who was reportedly under federal protection and serving as a witness to testify against his own former clients. As he followed the paper trail, Webb discovered that Blandon's biography read like a CIA operations manual. He was born into a wealthy family in Managua, moving to the U.S. in 1979 when the Sandinistas took power. Initially, he just sold cars in Los Angeles, but by 1981, everything changed. Blandon met Norin Meneses at a Contras fundraising event in San Francisco. Meneses was already Nicaragua's biggest drug lord at the time, with a network moving heroin and cocaine from Colombia to California. The two agreed on a plan: sell cocaine to black dealers in LA and send the profits back to the Contras. According to Blandon's own testimony, Contras leader Enrique Bermudez, who was on the CIA's payroll, was fully aware of this drug trafficking operation. Webb then sought out former DEA agent Celerino Castillo III. Castillo had investigated the drug ring connected to the Contras from 1985 to 1990. He recounted that every time they got close to arresting Meneses, a call from Washington would demand they stop the operation due to national security. Castillo showed Webb detailed reports on the cocaine flights from El Salvador to the U.S., which were protected by State Department personnel, all of which had been submitted and subsequently ignored. From Miami, Webb flew to Los Angeles, and the last big piece of the story lay inside a concrete cell. Ricky Freeway Ross. Ross was serving a life sentence without parole in federal prison. He didn't fit the image of a typical drug kingpin. Ross was illiterate until age 28 and once had a tennis scholarship to Cal State LA, but an injury shattered that dream. He started selling cocaine in 1979 just to pay the rent. In 1981, Ross's supplier introduced him to Blandon. Ross explained to Webb the economic formula for crack. When powdered cocaine cost around $55,000 per kilogram, only the wealthy could afford it. When the price dropped to about $12,000 per kilogram, mid-level dealers could get involved, but the poor couldn't pay $100 for a gram of powder. To solve this, Ross mixed the cocaine with baking soda, cooking it into small crack rocks. The high was the same, but each smoke session only cost $5. From 1 kilogram of powdered cocaine, Ross could turn a profit of about $75,000 in crack. Meanwhile, Blandon regularly brought him 100 kilos every week. 100 kilos every week translated into tens of thousands of retail sales, then tens of thousands of new addicts every month, and created an entire crack epidemic. Throughout that time, Blandon was shielded by the federal government. Webb tracked down LAPD Detective Steve Polak, who had investigated Blandon in 1986. Polak recounted that they had everything they needed: surveillance, wiretaps, and informants. Then one day the captain called, announcing the investigation was terminated. When Polak asked for the reason, he only received the answer: orders from Washington. Webb continued to dig deeper, obtaining the investigation file from the Senate committee chaired by John Kerry, about 30,000 pages that the government had tried to keep sealed. A 1983 U.S. Customs report explicitly noted that Norin Meneses was smuggling cocaine to fund the Contras. That means the government knew about it in 1983, 1 year before the crack epidemic exploded in the U.S. A 1986 FBI cable warned that Danilo Blandon was supplying cocaine to the Bloods and Crips gangs. The FBI knew crack was destroying Los Angeles, knew the source of supply, but did nothing. After confirming the overall picture, Webb returned to the newsroom and began writing. He took 4 months to complete 3 long articles, totaling about 20,000 words. Don Garcia assigned 2 people to fact-check the stories. They called every source, cross-referenced every document. The legal department scrutinized every sentence, every word. No one found any factual errors. The team needed a title. Webb proposed Dark Alliance, the dark alliance between drug traffickers and intelligence agencies. The graphics department created an unprecedented image: a crack smoker superimposed on the CIA seal. No newspaper had ever dared to accuse the CIA so directly. On August 18, 1996, the Mercury News published the series online first, a rather unusual move at the time. A few hours later, the website crashed from being overwhelmed. The newsroom recorded 1.3 million hits per day, whereas 50,000 was already considered huge. Black radio stations read the entire series on air. In Los Angeles, Chicago, and Washington, D.C., talk show hosts called it genocide and the final proof. In South Central L.A., Congresswoman Maxine Waters held up the newspaper during a community meeting and accused the CIA of protecting those who were killing our children. About 2,000 people cheered, then marched to the federal building in protest. CIA Director John Deutsch had never faced this kind of public outrage. In a context where Black communities were already deeply familiar with COINTELPRO, Tuskegee, and countless other deceptions, the government's denials held no value. Deutsch was forced to make an unprecedented decision to attend a direct community dialogue in Watts. On November 15, 1996, he arrived at Locke High School, expecting only a few hundred people to attend. In reality, about 1,700 people packed the auditorium. When he walked in, instead of applause, there were angry shouts. Mothers accused the CIA of killing my children. Someone yelled, "The CIA is the real drug gang." Deutsch tried to explain that the CIA doesn't traffic drugs, but was continuously drowned out by jeers of "liar." A Vietnam veteran stood up and recounted that he had fought for his country, only for his son to die from crack. And now he had to hear that his own government had protected the source of the poison. Deutsch was speechless. The scene aired on every television channel, pushing the CIA into a rare crisis of confidence. Webb watched it all from his hotel room, feeling both vindicated and afraid. He understood how the CIA dealt with a threat. 3 days later, Webb's phone rang. A cold voice said, "You're going to regret this," and hung up. His editor-in-chief advised him to stay at the hotel temporarily, but Webb refused because his 3 children were at home. From then on, he began seeing strange cars parked outside, clear clicks on the phone line, and unexplained errors on his work computer. It could have been paranoia, but in those circumstances, paranoia is sometimes just a keen awareness of a terrifying pattern. The counterattack did not come publicly from the CIA, but from the prestigious press. The LA Times, the Washington Post, and the New York Times simultaneously deployed their investigative forces, but the target was not the CIA, but Gary Webb. The LA Times held a meeting where editor-in-chief Shelby Coffey III assigned 17 reporters the task: prove Dark Alliance wrong. The question, did the CIA protect drug traffickers, was swept off the table. Instead, they scoured Webb's articles to find the smallest weak points. They focused on 3 points. First, Webb did not prove the CIA intentionally and specifically targeted the Black community. In fact, Webb only described the CIA looking the other way, but the LA Times exaggerated this as if he had accused them of actively poisoning Black people, and then triumphantly refuted the claim. Second, Webb did not prove the exact amount of drug money transferred to the Contras. It could have been $1 million. It could have been $10 million. He only used the word millions based on Ross's estimated sales. Instead of asking, why did any drug money flow into the Contras fund? They focused solely on saying, the figure is uncertain. Third, Webb did not prove that Blandon's cocaine was the sole cause of the crack epidemic. He never claimed that, but the LA Times still erected the straw man that Blandon created crack across all of America, and then easily tore down that phantom claim. The Washington Post and the New York Times joined in a similar manner. They didn't attack the documentation directly, but criticized the presentation, the sensational wording, and the too strong graphics. Some articles compared Webb to people who believed the moon landing was faked. No one interviewed crack victims, South Central residents, or the Contra traffickers, but they quoted numerous anonymous sources from the CIA. Meanwhile, these very same newspapers had published small notices about the Contras' drug involvement in the late 80s, then never touched the topic again. Now, when a local reporter dared to delve into the part they had ignored, they chose to attack him. At the Mercury News, editor-in-chief Jerry Shepos faced pressure from friends, colleagues, and major newsrooms. He received phone calls being suggested to retract the story. On May 11, 1997, Shepos published an article apologizing for the presentation of Dark Alliance, stating the series fell short of our standards, without specifying what those standards were. The national media immediately interpreted this as a confession that Webb was wrong. Every headline claimed that Webb's own newspaper had turned on him. Webb watched the work of his life be twisted, misquoted, and used as an example of a career lesson. Journalism conferences invoked his name as a warning to young reporters. Don't go too far like Gary Webb. Ultimately, the Mercury News relocated Webb to a small office, assigning him to cover traffic accidents, weather, and even the death by constipation of a police horse. The message was clear. If he didn't resign, he would be buried in trivial topics. In December 1997, Webb packed up his desk, leaving the newsroom after 20 years as an investigative reporter. His marriage fractured, his reputation was nearly obliterated, and his income plummeted. But there was one thing his critics didn't want to mention. The core of Webb's findings was correct. Blandon truly trafficked cocaine for the Contras. Ross truly used that supply to sell crack across America. Intelligence agencies truly knew and truly protected the drug sources useful to them. Webb learned a lesson that many other whistleblowers also understood. The system often doesn't attack the message, it attacks the messenger. When the messenger is destroyed, the message easily dies with them. Unable to return to mainstream journalism, Webb wrote a book expanding on the Dark Alliance series, adding hundreds of pages of documentation, context, and explanation. Major publishers refused it for being too sensitive. A small publisher finally accepted the book, but it was hidden in the obscure corners of bookstores without any media promotion. Webb applied for jobs at several major news outlets, but his applications were met with silence. He switched to investigating corruption for the California state legislature, working for a modest salary. Colleagues respected his ability, but everyone understood he was a trouble name. Publicly supporting Gary Webb was considered career suicide. By the early 2000s, depression consumed him. His eldest son once found him crying in his car, parked in front of their old foreclosed house. "I used to matter," Webb said. "I used to make a difference." His ex-wife, Susan Bell, recounted that he often called her at 3 a.m, unable to sleep, reciting the names of every editor he felt had betrayed him. In 2004, Webb sold his motorcycle to pay his rent, owed child support, and had maxed out his credit cards. The man who had won major journalism awards, who had exposed one of the biggest scandals of the 1980s, was now struggling to afford groceries. Early morning on December 10th, 2004, he shot himself in the head. The first bullet went through his cheek. He was in such agony that he pulled the trigger again. This time it was fatal. He was found dead at the age of 49. The major newspapers published brief obituaries, calling him the discredited reporter of Dark Alliance. In those short lines, they dedicated more words to repeating the old criticisms than to talking about his passing. But on the internet, forums, and independent news sites, many people said the opposite. Gary Webb was right all along. Internal documents, independent inspector general reports, and belated confessions all showed that the crack epidemic in America was not just the crime of petty dealers. It also had powerful accomplices in Washington. Gary Webb was one of the few who dared to write that truth for the whole country to read, and he paid for it with his career, his mental health, and ultimately, his life. The coroner's report stated he died by suicide with 2 gunshots to the head. For many people, that detail sounded implausible. A few years later, another name drew similar skepticism. John McAfee, the founder of the antivirus software, had repeatedly denounced the questionable activities of the CIA, surveillance programs, and the dark corners of the deep state. He was reportedly found dead by suicide in a Spanish prison, despite having posted a message not long before. "If I suicide, I didn't." For those who remembered the story of Gary Webb, McAfee's death only intensified the haunting question. Ultimately, Who are the ones who truly have to fear the truth being exposed?